Hello. I'm Detective Arthur Blackwood. In my 30 years with the NYPD, I thought I had seen every kind of evil this city could produce. Murders, thefts, betrayals. But I was wrong. The disappearance of Sarah Greene wasn't just a crime. It was an impossibility. A locked room mystery that defied the laws of physics. This case file has been It began on a Tuesday night in November 1998. A cold, wet night, just like this one. I was on patrol in the Bronx when the call came in at 3 a.m. Dispatch said there was a disturbance at an old tenement building on 4th Street. A frantic neighbor claimed someone was screaming inside apartment 4B. But it wasn't a normal scream. They said it sounded inhuman, like an animal in pain. I arrived at the building 10 minutes later. The air in the lobby felt heavy, oppressive, like walking underwater. I took the stairs to the 4th floor. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the usual smell of old cooking and dust. It smelled metallic, like blood mixed with ozone after a lightning strike. The hallway was empty, but I felt dozens of eyes watching me from the shadows. I stood outside apartment 4B. The screaming had stopped. Now, there was only silence. A deep, unnatural silence. I pounded on the door. NYPD. Open up. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. Deadbolted from the inside. My instincts screamed at me to run away. But I had a job to do. I stepped back and kicked the door with all my strength. The lock gave way with a loud crack. The door swung open, hitting the wall. I raised my gun, ready to fire. "Police, don't move," I shouted into the darkness. But my voice just echoed in the empty room. There was no attacker, no victim, just a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a thick blanket wrapped around my lungs. I scanned the living room. It wasn't abandoned. In fact, it looked like someone was just here seconds ago. On the small wooden table, a plate of pasta was still warm. A cup of coffee was releasing steam into the cold air. Sarah didn't pack a bag. She didn't run away. Whatever happened, it took her instantly, right in the middle of her dinner. I lowered my weapon and pulled out my flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows and landed on the far wall. I gasped. The floral wallpaper was defaced, covered in black scratches. Upon closer inspection, they weren't random scratches. They were drawings, made with charcoal, hundreds of spirals, twisting and turning, covering every inch of the wall from floor to ceiling. Among the spirals, there were eyes. Crude, angry eyes drawn in thick black strokes. They all seemed to be staring at one specific spot in the room, the ventilation shaft near the floor. And scrawled in the center, in shaky handwriting, was a message. He doesn't use the door. He flows through the walls. A chill ran down my spine. I holstered my flashlight and knelt down by the vent. The metal grate was bent outward, as if something had pushed its way out from the inside. Not something small like a rat. Something strong. I put my ear close to the opening. The smell of sulfur was overpowering here. It made my eyes water and my throat burn. I held my breath and listened. At first, just the wind whistling through the pipes. But then, deep down in the building's infrastructure, I heard it, a low, rhythmic scraping sound, like metal dragging on concrete. And then, a voice, faint, distorted, but undeniable. It whispered a name. Sarah. I backed away from the vent. That whisper, it felt too intimate, too close. I needed to understand who, or what, Sarah was dealing with. I moved to the bedroom. This was her sanctuary, but it felt violated. The sheets were twisted, evidence of sleepless nights. Following a hunch, I lifted the mattress. There it was, a leather-bound journal. She had hidden it, not from a thief, but from something that she knew was watching her every move. I opened the book. The early pages were mundane, work stress, dating troubles. But in October, the tone shifted drastically. The handwriting became jagged, pressed hard into the paper. She described a presence that didn't just watch, but studied her. She wrote, "It stands in the corner of my vision. When I turn, it's gone, but the smell remains. Sulfur and rot. It's waiting for me to fall asleep. It wants to be invited in." The entry from Halloween night was terrifying. Sarah claimed the entity started mimicking sounds. First, it was her cat. Then, Her mother's voice calling from the hallway. But her mother died 5 years ago. This wasn't a ghost. Ghosts are echoes of the past. This was a predator, using psychological lures to bait a trap. It was intelligent, cruel, and it was getting closer every single night. I looked up from the diary, my eyes drawn to the window. The curtains were partially torn, and there, illuminated by a flash of lightning, was a handprint on the glass. But it was on the outside. We were on the 4th floor. No balcony, no fire escape, just sheer brick wall. For a human to place a hand there, they would have to hover. The print was large, the fingers unnaturally long. This confirmed my worst fear. Sarah's abductor wasn't human. A sound behind me made me spin around. The closet door, which was shut when I entered, was now slowly creaking open. I hadn't touched it. I drew my revolver, leveling it at the widening gap of darkness. "Come out," I commanded, though my voice betrayed my fear. There was no response. Just the sound of labored breathing coming from inside the closet. Wet, raspy breathing. I approached cautiously, flashlight mounted on my wrist. I kicked the door fully open. It was empty of clothes. But the floor of the closet had been smashed through. A jagged hole led straight down into the darkness between the floors. This wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a tunnel, a nest. Sarah hadn't been taken out the front door. She had been dragged down into the guts of the building like prey. I stood at the edge of the abyss. Protocol dictated I call for backup, secure the scene, and wait. But in my gut, I knew time was a luxury Sarah didn't have. If I walked away now, the tunnel would be sealed. The evidence gone. I holstered my weapon, gripped my flashlight between my teeth, and lowered myself into the hole. The darkness swallowed me instantly. The air smelled ancient, filled with the dust of a century. The shaft was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It was a service chase used for plumbing pipes decades ago, now forgotten. As I descended, the temperature plummeted. The walls were slick with moisture. I felt like a virus invading the body of a dying beast. Every creak of the rusted ladder echoed like a gunshot in the silence. I counted the floors as I passed them. 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor, but the ladder kept going down. My boots hit concrete. I was in a crawl space that ran horizontally between the building's foundations. This was the terrifying part. I could hear life happening on the other side of the walls. Muffled arguments, television shows, a baby crying. These people were living their lives, completely unaware that a predator had built a highway right behind their headboards. It was a secret ecosystem of surveillance. I shined my light along the brickwork. It wasn't empty. The intruder had decorated his domain. Taped to the pipes were hundreds of Polaroid photographs. Candid shots of residents sleeping, eating, changing clothes. He had been watching everyone in the building for years. But the photos of Sarah were different. They were arranged in a circle, and her eyes in the photos had been scratched out with a sharp object. This wasn't just obsession, it was a ritual. I moved past the crawl space, pushing through a heavy rotting wooden door. Suddenly, the architecture changed. The red bricks of the 90s vanished, replaced by heavy, gray stone blocks and arched ceilings. The air here was dead, devoid of oxygen. I checked my structural maps mentally. There shouldn't be a basement this deep. I had crossed a threshold into a place that history had tried to bury. Then I saw the iron bars. Cells. Rows of rusted iron cells lining the corridor. Realization hit me like a physical blow. Before the tenement was built, this land belonged to the Blackwood Asylum for the Criminally Insane. It burned down in 1920, killing hundreds of patients locked in the basement. They didn't clear the ruins. They just built on top of the graves. And Sarah was somewhere in this necropolis. I followed the corridor until I reached a set of double swing doors. Surgery was faded on the frosted glass. I pushed inside. The smell changed instantly. No more rot. Here, it smelled of bleach and rubbing alcohol. Strong chemical fumes that burned my nose. In the center of the room sat an iron operating table, equipped with leather straps. The leather wasn't brittle or dusty. It looked oiled. It looked used. I approached the instrument tray next to the table. Scalpels, bone saws, drills, tools from a barbaric era of medicine. But they weren't rusted shut. They were clean, arranged in perfect order, except for one, a curved needle, sitting on a piece of gauze. The tip was stained with fresh crimson blood. It was still wet. Whoever, or whatever, was down here. They fancied themselves a doctor, and Sarah was their new patient. I left the surgery room and found an office adjacent to it. The walls were lined with filing cabinets. I pulled a random file. Patient 402. Diagnosis: hysteria. Treatment: hydrotherapy. The date was August 1920. But on the desk, amidst the ancient clutter, was a modern spiral notebook. I opened it. The handwriting matched the symbols on Sarah's wall. It was a logbook of candidates. I read the names. Dozens of them. People who had gone missing in this neighborhood over the last 10 years. Next to each name was a status. Failed, expired, reject, until I reached the bottom of the page. Sarah Greene. Status: processing. Stage 1. Fear conditioning. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was a continuation. Someone was trying to finish the experiments that the asylum started a century ago. The notebook mentioned hydrotherapy, so I headed towards the sound of dripping water. The room was vast, covered in cracked green tiles. Rows of cast iron bathtubs lined the floor. In the 1920s, they used to strap patients in freezing water for days to calm them. The air was thick with mold. Most tubs were empty, filled only with rust, but the one at the far end was full. I walked slowly towards the full tub. The water was murky, black as ink. I couldn't see the bottom. Floating on the surface was a single object. A woman's shoe. A red high heel. Sarah's shoe. I reached out to grab it. But then the water rippled. Bubbles rose to the surface. Something was submerged in that tub. And it was starting to move. I stepped back as a hand gripped the porcelain rim. But the fingers were wrong. Too long. Pale as bone. A head emerged from the black sludge. It wasn't Sarah. It was a man. Or what used to be a man. His eyes were sewn shut. His skin was translucent. This was one of the failed subjects from the notebook. He didn't see me, but he could smell me. He lunged. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! The shots echoed like cannon fire in the tiled room. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched sound that shattered the glass of a medicine cabinet nearby. The bullets hit him in the chest, pushing him back into the water. But he didn't die. He started thrashing, trying to climb out again. I realized bullets wouldn't stop him. I had to run. I sprinted out of the hydrotherapy room, turning left into the main hallway. My boots slammed against the stone floor. Behind me, I could hear the wet, slapping sound of naked feet chasing me. It was fast, unnaturally fast. I didn't look back. I knew if I stopped, I would become just another entry in that logbook. I needed a secure room, a place to barricade myself. I saw a heavy oak door ahead. The chapel. I threw myself against it, bursting inside, and slammed it shut. I dragged a heavy wooden pew across the entrance just as the creature slammed into the wood from the other side. The door shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. After a few seconds, the pounding stopped. It was waiting. Or maybe it found another way in. I backed away from the door, gun raised. The chapel was massive. Stained glass windows depicting twisted saints lined the walls. But there was no sunlight coming through them. Only the dim, artificial glow of the city above filtering down through grates. It was quiet here. Too quiet. I realized I wasn't just in a hospital anymore. This was a place of worship. But they weren't worshiping God. I walked down the center aisle. At the altar, candles were burning. They were fresh. Someone had been here recently. On the altar lay artifacts, locks of hair, teeth, and personal items. I recognized a watch. It belonged to a boy who went missing in 2005. And right in the center, a large book titled The Vessel. This was the headquarters, the heart of the operation. I opened the book. The pages felt thick, waxy. It took me a moment to realize they were made of dried skin. The text was written in Latin, interspersed with diagrams of the human brain. It detailed the asylum's true purpose. The doctors weren't trying to cure madness. They were trying to extract it, to distill pure terror, and use it to summon an entity they called the Watcher. I turned to the bookmark. There was a sketch of a woman. It looked exactly like Sarah. The text read, "Subject possesses the sight. She sees what others ignore. She is the perfect vessel." My blood ran cold. Sarah wasn't chosen at random. She was chosen because she was sensitive to the paranormal. They had been grooming her, scaring her, preparing her soul to be consumed. A folded blueprint fell out of the book. It was a map of the facility. I traced the lines with my finger. Ground floor, basement level 1, basement level 2. But there was more. A red line went deeper. Into the bedrock. The deep ward. A solitary confinement block buried 50 feet underground. That's where they kept the most dangerous cases. And that's where the red X marked Sarah's location. The map showed only one way down. The industrial freight elevator at the end of the east wing. It was a one-way trip. If the elevator failed, I would be buried alive. But I checked my revolver. 3 bullets left. Enough to save her, or enough to end it for both of us if things went wrong. I folded the map and headed east. I found the elevator. It looked like a cage designed for wild beasts. The iron bars were thick, covered in layers of grime and old paint. I stepped inside and pulled the heavy lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground shook. Gears groaned deep below, waking up from a decades-long slumber. The cage lurched downward. As I descended, the air grew colder, thinner. I watched the stone walls of the shaft pass by. Symbols were carved into the rock here too, protective wards. Maybe to keep something in rather than out. The descent felt endless, minute after minute of grinding metal. Finally, with a screech of brakes, the elevator stopped. I was in the deep ward, the heart of the nightmare. The elevator gates rattled open. I stepped out, and immediately the cage ascended, leaving me stranded. The deep ward was flooded. Dark, oily water swirled around my knees. The air was thick with mist and the smell of ozone. There were no lights here, only the weak beam of my flashlight cutting through the fog. I was 50 feet underground, in a tomb built for the living. Rows of heavy iron doors lined the corridor. Solitary confinement cells. Each one had a small sliding slot for food. I shined my light into the first cell. Empty. Just scratch marks on the stone floor. But as I walked deeper, the atmosphere changed. I heard sounds. Faint whimpering. Not from the cells, but echoing from the pipes. The plumbing here acted like a telephone line, carrying the voices of the damned. I found an unlocked room labeled intake. It wasn't a cell. It was a storage room. Shelves reached the ceiling, packed with cardboard boxes and suitcases. I realized with horror what this was. Trophies. These were the personal effects of every person who had ever been brought down here. Wallets, keys, wedding rings. It was a graveyard of memories, categorized and cataloged by year. I checked the most recent shelf. I saw Sarah's purse. Her ID was still inside. Next to it was a backpack belonging to a tourist who vanished last month. This operation wasn't sporadic. It was continuous, efficient, industrial scale. Whoever ran this place viewed humans as raw material. I took Sarah's ID and put it in my pocket. I made a silent promise. I'm taking you home. One way or another. I left the storage room, but something felt wrong. The air tasted sweet, metallic. A yellow mist was seeping from the vents on the floor. Old hallucinogenic gas, leaking from rusted canisters. My head started to spin. My vision blurred. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. I covered my mouth with a handkerchief. But it was too late. The gas was in my blood. Shadows peeled themselves off the walls. They took human forms. I saw faces I recognized from the missing persons files. They were standing in the water, pointing down the hall. "Don't go," they whispered. "He is hungry." I stumbled, trying to distinguish reality from nightmare. I aimed my gun at a shadow, but it dissolved into smoke. I had to keep moving before my mind shattered completely. I shook my head violently, trying to clear the hallucinations. The voices faded, replaced by the hum of heavy machinery. Ahead, a heavy steel door was slightly ajar. Yellow light spilled out, cutting through the darkness like a blade. I crept closer. The smell of ozone and sulfur was strongest here. This was it, the source. I gripped my revolver so tight my knuckles turned white. I peered through the crack. The room was a grotesque mix of 1920s medical equipment and modern technology. In the center, a man was working. He wore a filthy lab coat, stained with decades of grime and blood. He was old, unnaturally old, with skin like parchment paper. He moved with a twitchy, frantic energy. He was muttering to himself, mixing glowing fluids in glass beakers. The caretaker, then I saw her. lying on a stone slab behind the machinery. Sarah Greene. She was pale, unconscious, but alive. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm. But she wasn't just sleeping. Wires were attached to her temples, connecting her to a large copper tank filled with swirling black mist. They weren't putting things into her. They were extracting something out. I understood the machine's purpose instantly. It was a psychic siphon. The caretaker was draining Sarah's fear, her nightmares, her very life essence, to feed the entity in the tank. If the process finished, Sarah would be nothing but an empty shell. And whatever was in that tank would be strong enough to break free. I couldn't wait for backup. I had to act now. I stepped into the room, raising my gun. "Step away from the girl," I shouted, but I stepped on a broken vial. The crunch echoed like a gunshot. The caretaker froze. He didn't look scared. He slowly turned around, a twisted smile stretching across his face. His eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils. Possessed. "You're late, detective," he rasped. His voice sounded like two stones grinding together. "The transfer is almost complete. She has such exquisite terror." He grabbed a lever on the wall and pulled it. Sparks flew. The machinery roared to life. Louder than before. The tank began to shake. "Witness the rebirth," he screamed, lunging at me with a jagged scalpel. He hit me with the force of a truck. For an old man, he possessed supernatural strength. The scalpel slashed my coat, missing my ribs by an inch. I struck back, landing a heavy blow to his jaw. But he didn't even flinch. He just laughed, spitting blood and teeth. My gun slid across the floor. Out of reach, we wrestled, crashing into the control panel. In the struggle, a heavy iron wrench was knocked off the table. It flew through the air and smashed into the glass of the main containment tank. Crack! The sound stopped us both. A spiderweb fracture appeared on the thick glass. The black mist inside stopped swirling. It pressed against the crack, expanding it. The caretaker screamed, "No, not yet. It is too soon." The glass exploded outwards. I dove to the ground, covering my head as shards rained down like shrapnel. A wave of freezing cold black liquid flooded the room. From the wreckage, a pillar of smoke rose up. It solidified, forming a towering, shapeless mass of shadow. Two burning red eyes opened in the darkness. It was free, and it was angry. The caretaker ran towards it, arms open. "Master, I am your servant," he cried. The entity didn't care. It reached out a smoky tendril and lifted him into the air by his throat. I watched as the life drained from him in seconds. He withered away like a dried leaf until he was just a husk. The entity dropped his corpse and turned its burning gaze towards me. I used the distraction to scramble towards the stone table. Sarah was still unconscious. I ripped the wires from her temples. The machine sparked and died. I checked her pulse. Faint. But there. "Come on, kid, don't die on me," I whispered. I scooped her up in my arms. She was light, frail. Behind me, the entity roared again, shaking the foundations of the deep ward. I didn't look back. I ran, carrying Sarah. I sprinted out of the lab and back into the dark corridors. The ground was shaking. The entity was growing, expanding, filling the tunnels with its mass. I could feel the cold wave of its presence chasing our heels. The elevator was our only chance. But we were on the wrong side of the facility. We had to cross the asylum ruins again. I ran for what felt like miles. According to my mental map, we should have reached the elevator by now. But the corridor just kept stretching. The brick walls seemed to elongate, pulling away from us. I recognized a stain on the wall, a rust mark shaped like a hand. I passed it. Then, 20 seconds later, I passed it again. We weren't moving forward. We were running in a loop. I stopped, gasping for air. The entity wasn't just chasing us physically. It was warping the reality of the asylum. It was playing with us like a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. The floor tilted beneath my feet. Gravity shifted. For a moment, up became down. I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling into the ceiling. "Show me the way," I screamed at the darkness. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. Her eyes snapped open, wide with terror. She started thrashing in my arms, clawing at my coat. "No, no, put me down," she screamed. "You're carrying me towards him." I held her tight. "It's me, Sarah. I'm a detective. I'm getting you out." She stopped fighting and looked at me. Then her gaze drifted over my shoulder. Her pupils contracted. "Don't look back," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's right behind you. It doesn't have a face. But it's smiling." I froze. The hair on my neck stood up. Sarah possessed the sight. She could see the entity's true form even when it was invisible to me. "Which way?" I asked her. She pointed a shaking finger at a solid brick wall. "Through there," she said. "The door is hidden." I didn't question her. The darkness behind us was closing in, cold and heavy. I aimed for the solid wall she pointed at. It looked like suicide, running headfirst into bricks. I closed my eyes, shielded Sarah with my body, and slammed my shoulder into the wall. Instead of breaking my bones, the wall shattered like brittle sugar glass. We tumbled through into a hidden service tunnel. We landed on dusty concrete. The illusion was broken. We were back in the real physical world. I set Sarah down for a moment to catch my breath. The entity's reality warping powers were weaker here. "You saved us," I said. Sarah shook her head, clutching her chest. "It's not over," she said. The elevator is a trap. We can't use it." If the elevator was a trap, the sewers were our only option. We found a maintenance hatch and dropped down. The smell was indescribable, a mix of human waste and chemical runoff. The water came up to my waist, thick and oily. Sarah shivered against me. "The water," she whispered. "It's alive." She wasn't talking about bacteria. She meant something else. I shined my flashlight along the curved walls. Rats, hundreds of them, lining the pipes, floating on debris, but they weren't running away from the light. They were sitting perfectly still, staring at us. Their eyes glowed with the same unnatural red light I saw in the entity. "Don't look at them," Sarah warned. "They are his eyes. If they see us, he sees us." Suddenly, a high-pitched screech echoed through the tunnel. It didn't come from the rats, it came from the air itself. The command was given. The rats hissed in unison and dove into the water, swimming towards us like a tidal wave of fur and teeth. "Run!" I yelled, pushing Sarah forward. I pulled out a flare from my pocket and struck it. Magnesium fire hissed into life. I waved the flare, creating a wall of fire and smoke. The lead rats squealed and retreated, blinded by the intensity, but there were too many. They were climbing my legs, biting through my trousers. I kicked them off, feeling their small bones crunch. "The ladder!" Sarah screamed, pointing ahead. A rusty iron ladder led up to a manhole cover, 50 yards away. I shoved Sarah onto the ladder first. "Go. Don't look down," I ordered. She scrambled up, her hands slipping on the slimy rungs. I followed right behind her, using my body to shield her from below. The swarm of rats gathered at the bottom of the shaft, piling on top of each other, forming a pyramid of bodies to try and reach us. The sound of their gnashing teeth was deafening. We were halfway up when the tunnel below groaned. The entity wasn't done. Black water began to surge up the shaft, rising faster than we could climb. It wasn't natural water, it was the entity itself. Liquid and hungry. "Faster, Sarah," I yelled. She reached the top and pushed against the manhole cover. It wouldn't budge. It was rusted shut. The black water was inches from my boots. I climbed up next to Sarah, jamming my shoulder against the iron cover. On 3, I grit my teeth. 1, 2, 3. We pushed together, with a screech of tearing metal. The rust gave way. The cover flipped over. We scrambled out onto a concrete floor, collapsing just as the black water erupted from the hole like a geyser. I kicked the heavy cover back into place, sealing the hole. The geyser slammed against it from below, but it held. We lay there, panting. We weren't outside yet. We were in the boiler room, the basement of the apartment building. The air was hot, filled with steam. Red emergency lights rotated, casting long, dancing shadows. We were back in the building where it all started. But now, the building was awake. We stumbled out of the boiler room and found the stairwell. "Up," I said. "We just need to get to the ground floor lobby." We started climbing. 1 flight, 2 flights. My legs burned, but the adrenaline kept me moving. Sarah was limping, leaning heavily on my arm. We passed the door for the first floor, then the second. But where was the lobby? We climbed another 3 flights. By my count, we should be on the roof. But when I looked at the door number, it read, basement level 2. We were going up, but the building was pushing us down. It was a loop, a Penrose staircase designed to trap us in an endless cycle of exhaustion. "It's not real," Sarah gasped. "Close your eyes. We have to walk by feel, not by sight." We burst through the next door, eyes shut tight, breaking the loop. When I opened them, We were in a hallway. But it wasn't empty. It was crowded. Dozens of translucent figures stood in front of the apartment doors. Men, women, children. They were gray, motionless, like statues made of cigarette smoke. The tenants, the people who lived here, or used to. As we walked past them, their heads turned in unison to follow us. They didn't have faces, just smooth gray surfaces, but I could feel their sorrow. They were trapped in the building's digestive system, slowly being broken down to feed the entity. One figure reached out a smoky hand to touch Sarah. She flinched. "They want us to stay," she said. "They're lonely." We saw the lobby sign ahead. I almost cried with relief. We ran towards the main entrance, where the glass doors should have been leading to the street, to safety. But the doors were gone. In their place was a wall of pulsating red flesh, veined and wet. The building had grown a skin over its exits. It had sealed itself shut like a healing wound. I pounded on the fleshy wall. It was warm, alive. It absorbed my blows like rubber. "Let us out," I screamed, firing my last bullet into the mass. The flesh hissed and healed over the bullet hole instantly. We were trapped, buried in a living tomb. The floor beneath us began to tremble. The entity was coming up from the basement. It was done playing. I slid down the wall, defeated, but Sarah grabbed my arm. Her eyes were clear, focused. When I was connected to the machine, she said, "I saw the blueprints of this place. Not the building, but the organism. The gas lines inside the walls. They're its veins. And the main valve is right behind this lobby wall. If we open it and ignite it, we kill the building." I finished her sentence. It was suicide. An explosion that size would level the block. But it was better than being digested slowly. I looked at my Zippo lighter. "We need to breach the wall to get to the valve," I said. "I don't have any bullets." Sarah looked at the fire axe encased in glass on the wall. "We don't need bullets," she said. I ran to the emergency case. In case of fire, break glass. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were about to become the fire. I wrapped my elbow in my coat and smashed the glass. Shards rained down on the floor. I grabbed the heavy red axe. It felt solid, cold. A primitive tool for a primitive fight. "Stand back," I told Sarah. I swung the axe at the pulsating wall where the lobby doors used to be. Thwack! It didn't sound like hitting plaster. It sounded like chopping meat. A dark, viscous fluid sprayed out, covering my face. The building screamed, low, structural moan that vibrated through the floorboards. I swung again, and again, hacking through the muscle to find the bone. After the 10th swing, metal sparked against metal. I tore away a flap of thick, rubbery skin. There it was, the main gas line, a rusted iron pipe, pulsing in time with the building's heartbeat. I had nicked it. Yellow gas was hissing out, smelling of rotten eggs and death. I found it. I yelled over the noise. Get the lighter ready.
Oh no!
Sarah pulled out the Zippo, her hands shaking, but before she could spark it, the temperature in the lobby dropped. My breath turned into mist. The shadows in the corners of the room began to lengthen, stretching towards us like grasping fingers. The moan of the building turned into a roar. The entity had caught up. It wasn't going to let us burn its home without a fight. Black smoke poured out of the elevator shaft, coalescing in the center of the lobby. It towered over us, a swirling vortex of darkness. Inside the smoke, I saw faces, thousands of them. The victims, screaming in silent agony. It formed a giant hand, solidifying into obsidian claws. You cannot escape. A voice boomed, vibrating inside my skull. You are mine. I pushed Sarah behind me. Finish it, I screamed at her. Break the pipe, light it up. I gripped the axe handle with both hands. I was just a man with a piece of steel against a god of shadows. But I had something it didn't. I had nothing left to lose. As the claw swung down, I didn't flinch. I swung back. The axe collided with the shadow claw. It felt like hitting solid rock. The impact jarred my arms up to the shoulders. The entity swatted me aside like a fly. I flew across the lobby, crashing into the reception desk. Pain exploded in my ribs. I tasted blood, but I saw Sarah. She was hacking at the pipe with a piece of broken glass. She needed time. I had to buy her seconds. I forced myself up. My vision was swimming. Is that all you got? I taunted, spitting blood on the marble floor. The entity turned its burning eyes back to me. It seemed confused by my defiance. That was its weakness. It understood fear, not courage. It roared and charged at me again. Now, Sarah, do it now, I yelled. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the chaos. Sarah had done it. She leveraged the shard of glass and snapped the rusted valve off completely. A jet of yellow gas erupted into the lobby, hissing like a serpent. The smell was instant and overpowering, rotten eggs and sulfur. The concentration was lethal. One spark, and this whole block would be a crater. The entity recoiled. The gas confused its senses. Blurring its vision, it swiped blindly at the air, its obsidian claws missing me by inches. I tried to stand, but my legs collapsed. My ribs were broken. I could feel internal bleeding. I looked at the exit. The flesh wall was still there, but the blast from the gas pipe had torn a small hole near the ceiling. Just big enough for one person. Sarah crawled over to me, grabbing my arm. "We have to go. The hole. We can climb out," she cried. I looked at the hole. 10 feet up. Then I looked at my broken body. I smiled, blood staining my teeth. "Not we. Sarah. You. I can't make that climb." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face mixing with the soot. "No. I'm not leaving you." I pulled the leather journal from my coat, the evidence of everything that happened here. I shoved it into her hands. "Take this. Tell the world what happened. Don't let them be forgotten." The entity roared, regaining its focus. It saw us through the fog. Time was up. "Go," I screamed, using the last of my strength to push her towards the pile of rubble under the hole. She hesitated for a split second, then scrambled up the rubble. She was agile, fueled by survival instinct. She reached the hole and pulled herself up. She looked back one last time. "Arthur," she screamed, her voice cracking. I waved her off. "Run, Sarah. Don't stop running." She disappeared into the night air. I was alone. The entity loomed over me. It filled the entire room now, blocking out the light. It knew what I was planning. It could smell the gas. But it was arrogant. It thought fear would stop me. I pulled out my Zippo lighter. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I looked straight into its burning red eyes. "You want a soul?" I asked. "Come and take it." The creature lunged, claws outstretched to rip me apart. I didn't flinch. I flicked the wheel. The flame sparked to life. A tiny beacon of orange in the sea of gray. "Case closed," I whispered. I dropped the lighter. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, spinning end over end, falling towards the pool of gas accumulating on the floor. The ignition was instant. A wall of white heat consumed me. Consumed the entity. Consumed the rot and the evil. The shockwave blew out the foundation. The ceiling collapsed. The asylum, the apartment, the prison, it all came crashing down. Buried under tons of brick and concrete. The fire purified everything. And then, there was silence. I woke up in the back of an ambulance. The sun was rising, casting a pale light over the destruction. The entire apartment complex was gone, reduced to a mountain of smoking brick and twisted metal. The explosion had been heard across 3 boroughs. The official report said it was a catastrophic gas main failure. They didn't know about the lab. They didn't know about the monsters. By noon, the recovery teams started finding bodies. Not just the tenants who didn't make it out. Digging deep into the sub-basement, they found the skeletal remains of dozens of missing people. The trophy room had been exposed. The police were baffled. They called it the work of a serial killer cult. I sat there, clutching the leather journal, knowing the truth was far worse. A detective approached me. He was holding a plastic bag. Inside was a scorched badge. Detective Arthur Blackwood. He read the name. We found this near the epicenter of the blast. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. Is he? I couldn't finish the sentence. The officer shook his head. We found the badge, ma'am, but we didn't find him. No remains. Nothing. That was impossible. An explosion that fierce would leave traces. Fragments. But Arthur had simply vanished. It was as if the fire didn't destroy him, but transported him. I remembered his last look. He wasn't afraid. He looked like a man who was accepting a promotion, not death. I handed the journal to the police. Read this, I said. Read it all. "6 months. The doctors say I have PTSD. They say the monsters were hallucinations caused by the gas leak. I tried to believe them. I moved to a new apartment. Across the river. I changed my name. But silence is loud. When the city sleeps, I can still hear the scratching inside the walls. Not here, but somewhere. The connection wasn't broken. It was just muted." Every night, I wake up at exactly 3:33 a.m. The witching hour. The same time the entity used to watch me. Tonight, for the first time, my phone rang. I don't have a landline service. I unplugged it weeks ago. but it was ringing, loud, insistent, echoing through the empty room like a funeral bell. I picked it up. My hand was trembling so bad I almost dropped it. "Hello?" I whispered. At first, there was only static, white noise. But beneath the static, there was a sound I recognized. The sound of dripping water. The sound of the deep ward. And then, a voice. It was distorted, distant, like it was coming from underwater. "Sarah," the voice crackled. It sounded like Arthur, but it also sounded wrong, too hollow. "Sarah, the door is open." I couldn't close it. My blood froze. Was it really him, warning me? Or was it mimicking his voice to lure me back? Using his memory as a bait? The line went dead. I slowly put the phone down. I told myself it was a prank, a nightmare. But then I felt it. The drop in temperature. The smell of sulfur filling my new clean apartment. I realized then, we never escaped. We just moved to a bigger cage. I didn't turn around. I knew if I turned around, I would see him. Some cases remain unsolved for a reason. Because the answer isn't something you want to find. Detective Blackwood is listed as missing. But I know where he is. He is in the dark, waiting for me. This has been a mysterious trail story. Sleep well, and check your windows.